can't make those noises right now. I'm live. People don't realize that I'm here. Shh, quiet. Shh. Let's see if I can tune this drum. Sounds a bit pingy. Ping bong. It's getting there. You don't want to wait for that, do you? Excuse me. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And that made me cough. All right. So I want to do an experiment very briefly. Hello. How's it going? Surgery, anyone? No, so over the summer months, I'm going to get people asking me to do storytelling, and some people I think are going to be worried if I'm not wearing a mask. So I'm trying to figure out how that sounds coming through a microphone, whether it sounds a bit huffy and puffy and all that kind of stuff. I just have no idea. Is it 1 o'clock yet? No, not yet. So we're okay. So today, woohoo, got 2 thumbs up. Sounds okay? Good, excellent. We can take this off now, because it gets steamy underneath there. I've made some changes to my studio, and I've ordered a new light. So the lighting might be extra cool next week. Who knows? So today, unfortunately, can you hear me over the drum? Just give me some thumbs up. We've got 3 right now, so if I get 3 more... Oh, there we go. You sound pretty clear. Thank you very much. Megera. Now that's a cool name. Am I pronouncing that properly? Megera. I'll show everybody else what that name looks like. It's a very... I mean, your whole name is very cool. I mean, really. I mean, how often do you meet a Megera Vitum Fitch? That is just the bee's knees for names, I think. And Scott is here too. Hey, Scott. How you doing? I had a chat with Scott this morning on the phone about other things. So here's the deal. Today's going to be a little bit different from my usual Wednesday show, because what happened was my printer ran out of ink. Because printers do that, you know. You'll be printing stuff and it'll say, warning, warning, you're running out of ink. And you think, okay, I'll order it. And you keep printing stuff out and, you know, warning, it's about to run out of ink. It's like, yeah, I'll be okay. Then your daughter comes up and says, Daddy, can you print some pictures for my bedroom? And it's like, okay, of course I will. And you print them out and it's like the printer dies and the ink hasn't arrived. So unfortunately, this week, I'm not going to be doing stories that you guys have with pictures that you've sent me. And Sadie, I have to massively apologize because I didn't use your picture last week or maybe the week before. But I have printed it out. It was one of the ones, it was a picture that I was able to print out before the printer died on me. But all the other pictures I'm going to use next week. And so this week, I'm going to do something a little bit different. And I'm going to tell you some stories, or a story, and I'm going to read you a couple of other stories. Because what I decided to do this morning was, when my printer ran out of ink, was look at some of the old picture books that I've got. Well, not all of them are old. Some of them are quite new. But this one, now this book right here, The Whale Song by Diane Sheldon. This book, I bought it when it first came out a long time ago, back when I was a wee lad. Actually, I wasn't a wee lad. I was actually in my 20s when I bought this, I think. Let's have a look at the date on it. What does it say? First published in 1990. So I wasn't quite in my 20s yet. But I was in my late teens. I was still buying picture books. And you might think, well, that's kind of odd. for like a late teenage to buy picture books, but I love picture books. I always have done. And this one has some amazing pictures in it. It's all about a whale and a little girl. Shall I start? I'm going to start with this because it's open right now. Lily's grandmother told her a story. It's a bit rubbish, isn't it? Once upon a time, she said, the ocean was filled with whales. They were as big as hills. They were as peaceful as the moon. They were the most wondrous creatures you could ever imagine. Which I think is true. Now, my brother Colin, he would love this book. He's probably seen it, actually. I've got to get this right. So this is Lily and her grandmother who's telling her the stories. And the pictures are really, if I can get close enough to show you some of the details of it. I mean, isn't that amazing? You don't need to see me. Isn't that amazing? Lily climbed onto her grandmother's lap. I used to sit at the end of the jetty and listen for whales, said Lily's grandmother. Sometimes I'd sit there all day and all night, and then all of a sudden I'd see them coming from miles away. They moved through the water as if they were dancing. But how did they know you were there, Grandma? Asked Lily. How would they find you? Lily's grandmother smiled. Oh, you had to bring them something special, a perfect shell or a beautiful stone, and if they liked you, the whales would take your gift and give you something in return. What would they give you, Grandma? What would they give you? Asked Lily. What did you get from the whales? Lily's grandmother sighed. Once or twice, she whispered. Once or twice, I heard them sing. That must be a wondrous thing. And then Lily's Uncle Frederick stomped into the room. You're nothing but a daft old fool, he snapped. Whales were important for their meat, for their bones, and for their blubber. He's a grumpy old sourpuss, isn't he? Let's see if I can find him a bit better. Me. Poor Lily. Look at her face. She's all like, what? No, that can't be true. Even Grandma looks a bit miffed. Whales were important for their meat and their bones and their blubber. If you have to tell Lily something, then tell her something useful. Don't fill her head with nonsense. Singing whales, indeed. And off he went. There he goes. You can see his legs right. Whoops. His legs right there. And the kitty cat sitting on the chair. And there's Grandma and there's Lily. There were whales here many millions of years before there were ships or cities or even cavemen, continued Lily's grandmother. People used to say they were magical. People used to eat them and boil them down for oil, grumbled Lily's Uncle Frederick. And he turned his back and he stomped out of the room. But Lily, I've got to show you this picture because it's awesome. Lily that night dreamt of whales. In her dreams, she saw them as large as mountains and bluer than the sky. In her dreams, she heard them singing, their voices like the wind. In her dreams, they leapt from the water and called her name. Sorry, it's a bit slow doing this, isn't it? Next morning, Lily went down to the ocean. There she is, sitting on the edge of the jetty. Yeah, let's bring it close up, because this is what I like about these pictures, is the details in them are amazing. I mean, don't you just feel that you're right there? Isn't it amazing? Next morning, Lily went down to the ocean. She went where no one fished or swam or sailed their boats. She walked to the end of the old jetty. The water was empty and still. Out of her pocket, she took a yellow flower and dropped it in the water. This is for you, she called into the air. Do you think it's for the whales? I think so too. And there's Grandpa again. Meh, 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 meh. Can you see Lily sitting on the edge of the jetty there? Yeah. There's Grandpa bending over, wagging his finger. Ooh, grumpy old man. I'll probably be like that when I'm older. Lily sat at the end of the jetty and waited. She waited all morning and all afternoon. Then, as dusk began to fall, Uncle Frederick came down the hill after her. "Enough of this foolishness," he said. "Come on home. I'll not have you daydreaming your life away." Ooh. But that night, Lily awoke suddenly. There she is at a window. You got a teddy bear like that? Looks like the moonlight's out, doesn't it? Yeah. That night, Lily awoke suddenly. The room was bright with moonlight. She sat up and listened. The house was quiet. Lily climbed out of bed and went to the window. She could hear something in the distance on the far side of the hill. She raced outside, down to the shore. Her heart was pounding to reach the sea. There, enormous in the ocean, were the whales. They leapt and jumped and spun across the moon. Their singing filled the night. Lily saw her yellow flower dancing in the spray. I don't know if you can see the yellow flower. I shall try to zoom in on it. There it is, right there. But all the whales dancing in the moon, and there's Lily right there, watching it all. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Suddenly, Lily felt the breeze rustle her nightdress and a cold nip at her toes. She shivered and rubbed her eyes. Then it seemed the ocean was still again, and the night black and silent. Lily thought she must have been dreaming. She stood up and turned for home. And then, from far, far away, on the breath of the wind, she heard them call, "Lily, Lily." The whales were calling her name. And that is The Whale Song by Diane Sheldon and illustrated by Gary Blythe. That's what they look like, or they did back in 1990. I bet they've changed a bit since then. So that was one of my favourite books as a young adult. But I've also got lots of other favourite books that I want to share with you. This is Ashley Bryan, who lives up in Maine, I think, an amazing writer. And this is a poetry book, kind of, storybook, poetry book, kind of, with these beautiful, beautiful pictures in them. I'm not going to read you this story, but it's called The Dancing Granny. And it's an African story. It's an Anansi story, of course, but it's a beautiful, beautiful story. And I'm just showing you some of my favourite writers and illustrators. Ashley Bryan is one of them. And that book by Diane is amazing. David Eliot is also another one of my favourite writers. David Eliot, he is the guy that did... Oh, what was that? It's the pirate book, The Day I Became a Pirate, right? And he also wrote David. But he wrote this called Finn Throws a Fit. But it's illustrated by an English guy called, I think he's English, Timothy Basil Eyring. Eyring? I don't know. But Finn Throws a Fit is a fabulous book. It's a really fun read. I'm not going to read it right now, but I'm going to look at these. Today, Finn is cranky. Anything could happen. I mean, this is for little kids, but it's a great book. I'm actually going to send it to my cousin because I think she might need it. She has 3 little kids and she's living in a tiny little house in Brixton. And then there's this book, this is one of my all-time favorites, although it's a very recent book. This book is called Journey, and it's by Aaron Becker. And it was printed not that long ago. Oh, it's Candlewick Press, actually, which is even better. And this came out in 2013, which is quite a long time ago, but it's still an amazingly good book. And it's wordless. So you can make up your own words as you read the story. So you should definitely have a look at this, because there's a character in here, right there, I think he's right there, who is from another book, but he's got a bit older. And then there's this young girl, and you can see what's going on in her life. Her dad's working away at the computer, and mom's in the kitchen doing stuff, which is a bit, not at all stereotypical. But great book. Great book. And then I have this. I've actually told you this story the other week. This is by Eric Madden. Right there. Eric Madden. Zoom. And illustrated by Paul Hess. And I read this story, The Cow on the Roof. And Eric Madden is basically the guy that I have to blame for becoming a storyteller. I was working in youth hostels, and I was taken to see this castle, and there was an interpretation there. And Eric Madden was telling stories. And I bought a 3 cassette tape box with stories about real English stuff. The Cow on the Roof was not in it. This came along much, much later, because that was back in the 1990s. And this came out in 2006. But if you get the chance to look up any of Paul Hess's, Paul Hess's and Eric Madden's stories, they are very, very good. Eric Madden's a fun storyteller. I'm not going to read you that either, but I just wanted to share those things with you. Now, again, for those of you that might have come a bit late, my printer decided to run out of ink. And I ran out after the ink, but the ink was too fast and I couldn't catch it up. And I ordered some more, and it still hasn't arrived yet. But Jessica was very nice. She did send me some money to help pay for those inks. So I feel kind of bad that they haven't arrived yet, and I haven't been able to print out any of the pictures. But next week, I shall use the pictures you sent me this week. I shall also add the pictures that you're going to send me next week, and we're going to have a phenomenal story. And I'm going to tell you a story right now. I hope you like it. This story is a new story to me. And I got to practice it somehow, right? And it's a Finnish story. Finnish, comes from Finland. And it's about these 3 brothers. Now this is, if you were watching the NSN Spotlight the other night, at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, then at the very end, there was this amazing storyteller called Tim Jennings. Now, I've been a huge fan of Tim Jennings for a long, long time. He and Leanne, his wife Leanne, who is sadly not able to perform anymore. Tim and Leanne were probably the country's best tandem tellers, the most dynamic, at least the most dynamic tandem storytellers I have ever witnessed in my life. They are absolutely incredible. Leanne can't tell stories anymore, but Tim can. And Tim is also one of my favorite storytellers, and he's also a great guy. I also have an episode of Conversations with Storytellers on my podcast, which is with Tim. Leanne was there, but she wasn't part of it, sadly. And Tim's telling this same story, but we tell it very, very differently. So for those of you, because I'd never seen Tim's version until then, and I didn't even know he told that story. And so when I found out that he told that story, I was like, oh my gosh, no, because that's Tim. He's so good. I'm going to tie a bow tie. That's right. I have a squirrel in my head that runs around and shouts things at me. And it just said, tie a bow tie with that scarf. There. Isn't that lovely? Fashion statement if there ever was one. So anyway, this story is known as Jack the Dullard, a retelling of a story, which is the Hans Christian Andersen title that I found in the book. And it's also known as Clodhopper Hans, or Clodhopper Jack, and it is also known as Jack the Dimwit. But I don't think Jack was a dimwit at all. No, Jack. No, I'll tell you about this. Because I don't want to jump the gun on this. Because it's very important that you think that Jack might be a bit but he's not a bit he is a bit he's a bit like I am, right? He's a bit but it's okay to be sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Well, once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a farmer, and she were married, and the farmer, he was always worrying about stuff. You know what worrywarts are like? Oh, I worry about this, I worry about that. Well, the husband farmer, he was like that. And so he went to see a Sami, and a very wise woman. And he went to the Sami and asked the Sami, I worry about my future. I worry about any children my wife and I might have and their future and what their lives are going to be like. And the Sami said, well, you will have 3 sons. And when each son is born, plant a tree and name the tree after that son. And when they are grown full into men, then each one of them will take their tree and cut it down. And wherever that tree falls, it will point to their true love. And the farmer husband was like, oh, that's great. I don't have to worry about that now. And so he made his way home. He told his wife, the other farmer, right, the Mrs. Farmer, right, because she was also a farmer. And she was happy to hear this. Anyway, the time came when boy number 1 came along. Wah! And they named boy number 1 Oni. I know what it's like. I was there for both of mine. I'm just being silly. Back off, okay? And out came Oni. Oni. O-N-N-I. Oni. Out came this baby called Oni, and they planted a tree, and they named the tree Oni, and the tree grew to be tall and strong, as did Oni. But before he got big and strong, out came another one. Ani this time. He came out, and such a cute little baby. And they planted a tree, and they named that tree Ani. And that tree grew big and strong, and Ani grew big and strong. But before he and his brother grew big and strong, there was also Jack. Hans Jack. And he came out, and they planted a tree for him. Now, Oni, when he reached that age of marriage, he looked at his brothers and thought, I don't want to wait for them. I want to cut down my tree now. And so Oni went to his father and said, Father, now I wish to cut my tree down. I wish to be married. And my brothers, they also want to be married. Ani was like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's great. But Hans, he was kind of like, I don't know. Do I really want to get married? I'm not 18 like him, and I'm not 21 like you. I don't know. And the father said, yes, you can marry. Now, here's the thing. Ani really liked this rich girl in the village. She was, blonde, blue-eyed, beautiful girl. And Ani was madly in love with her. And he knew how to cut down trees. So when he cut down the tree, it fell right over there, where I've been looking, right over there, pointing directly to this girl that he was madly in love with, to her house. Now, Arnie, he also liked a certain girl. He liked a farmer's daughter, another farmer's daughter. This was another rich daughter. And he knew where she lived, in her little farmer's cottage. And he knew how to cut down trees too, and he cut down his tree, and it pointed right towards where that farmer's girl lived. And then Hans, he was kind of like, okay, I'll cut down a tree. And he took his axe and he cut down the tree. And when that fell down, it pointed towards the forest. Now his brothers laughed at him. What are you going to marry? You going to marry a wolf? Or a bear? Or a squirrel? What are you going to find in the forest? Who are you going to marry in the forest? But Hans was like, I don't care. I'll find a bride. I'll find someone to be betrothed with me. And off he set. And he walked and walked and walked and walked and walked. And nighttime came. And so he found these trees, these huge roots that stuck out of the ground, and he nestled down between them, and he went to sleep. Covered himself up with leaves, went to sleep. And the next morning, he was aching. Can you imagine sleeping in a forest, damp ground, strange noises probably waking him up all through the night? And off he went again. He's walking and walking and walking and walking, and he kept walking. There were brambles and bushes and nettles that would swipe at his arms and tear his clothes, scuff his shoes up. And he plodded on and on and on, and still he found nowhere. He stopped and rested at a stream, drank some of the water, Not from the stream, because that's a bad thing. What he did was actually he dug a hole next to the stream, below the water's height of the stream, dug down into the earth and waited for that hole to fill up, because that earth filtered out all of the bad things, and then he drank the water, because he was smart like that, even though he was, you know what I'm talking about, right? And the next day, third day, off he goes. And about lunchtime, he came across this cottage in a clearing, this tupper. And when he got to this cottage, he looked through the windows, and windows were filthy dirty. The whole cottage looked a bit run down. But he knocked on the door, nice and polite. Didn't hear anything, and he knocked again. Didn't hear anything, and so he opened the door and peered in and said, "Hello? Hello, is there anybody there? Hello?" And he saw in front of him, there was this big, beautiful wooden kitchen table, rough-hewn wood, scrubbed down nice and smooth. It was gorgeous. There was a bench on one side and chairs around the other sides. It was a beautiful table, and on top of this table was a little tiny mouse, and this little tiny mouse was preening herself. She was washing herself. And as Arnie got closer, he noticed that this little mouse... Wow. You're a cute little mouse. You've got big blue eyes. I've never seen a mouse with blue eyes before. And the mouse said, "You look a little bit sad." "Whoa! It's a talking mouse." "Well, you can talk, so why can't I?" "Well, I suppose so, but that's hello. But you look sad. Why are you looking sad?" "Well, my father and my brothers, they said that it's time for us to find a bride, and so we cut down this tree, which is supposed to point to where we were going to find our future wives, and I'm not very good at cutting down trees, and I came 3 days it took me to get here. 3 days I walked through the forest, and I still have found no one." And the mouse looked up at Hans and said, "You can marry me if you like." And Hans, "You're a mouse, and you're a boy." "Yeah, I guess I am." And he looked at her soft grey fur, a little pink nose, and he thought, actually, he said it out loud, "I think you make a good companion." "Yeah, I think you would make a good companion, and I don't care." And so he scratched the mouse on the head. He said, "All right, I'll go and tell my father that I have found my betrothed." And he set off back home. Now, coming back home didn't take him as long as it did getting there. He was a little bit light of step, but as he got close to home, he started to slow down. He's like thinking, "What am I going to tell my dad? What my brother's going to say? That I'm marrying a mouse. What can I do?" Anyway, he got home, and his brothers were already there. They got there days ago. I mean, it took him 3 days there and 3 days back, right? And his brothers only had to go into the town, into the village. They were like gone and back within a day easily. And they're looking at Hans, asking him where he had been. "Well, I've walked for 3 days before I found someone." "Well, you found someone? What does she look like?" said his brothers. "Well, she has beautiful, soft grey hair, a cute little nose, and the brightest of blue eyes." And they started laughing at him. "Grey hair? You marrying some old woman?" "No," he said. All of which was true. His brothers decided to tell Hans how beautiful their future wives were, how gorgeous they looked, and how sensible they were, and what kind of a woman would you find in a forest. But Hans didn't care. Well, the mother came, and she said to her 3 boys, she says, "Now, tomorrow I want you to go out, and I want you to ask your brides to bake some bread, and you ought to bring it back to me, because I want to try the bread and see how good it tastes." So all the boys agreed that they would do this, and Arnie went off to his girl, and Hans went off to his mouse bride. Now he made his way through the forest. He was somewhat excited about it, but how can a mouse bake bread? How can a mouse do that? He didn't know. But he made his way to the house. And on the way, on the second day, he found this beautiful little flower, a little purple flower. And so he picked it and he took it. And he knocked on the door again and came in and stuck his head around the door. And there was a mouse on the table, sitting up on her little back legs, preening herself. And he said, "Look, I brought you a gift." And he handed her the flower, the purple flower. And she said, "Oh, thank you. Have you come to marry me? Or do you have a task for me?" I I have a task for you. He wondered how she must have known this. Maybe she just guessed. No, I have a task for you, but I'm not sure how you can do it. I thought you looked a little sad still. Well, my mother asked all of my brothers and myself to ask our betrothed, our future brides, to bake a loaf of bread. Oh, that's not a problem, said the mouse bride. And she sat up on her haunches, tail wrapped around her toes, and she stood with her back straight, and she squeaked in mousy squeak talk. And in came, from who knows where, 100 mice. Hans looked all around at these mice. Oh my gosh, this is a lot of mice. And she said, oh yes, they are. There are a lot of mice here. And she spoke. I want you to take yourselves out and find the finest wheat grain that you can find. Now go on. And off they went. And then she turned to Hans and told him to light the oven, the stove. And so he found some wood outside. There's a pile of chopped wood outside, very old wood that was chopped up outside, but it was covered so it was dry, and he started to get the fire going. And the mice came back with all these tiny little grains, and they washed themselves in the trough outside, and then they all started to grind the grains, and out of the ground grains became flour. And then they took this flour, these clean washed mice took all this flour into the house, into the cottage, into the tupper, and the mouse bride, she started to mix the flour. And the other mice helped her, and they formed it and put it on a stone plate, and they shoved it in the oven. And a few hours later, after the rising and falling, the baking, there was this loaf of bread. The mouse bride pointed to a drawer, and out of the drawer, Hans took this linen cloth, and he laid it down, put the bread on it, and wrapped up the bread, and put the bread in his jacket, and said thank you to the mouse bride. And he leaned over and did what I would probably have done, and that was just rub noses with the mouse. They just touched noses. No. He says, thank you so much. You're amazing. And off he went. 3 days back home. And there were his brothers with their loaves of bread made by their sweethearts. And the mother hadn't tried either of them. She wanted to try them all at the same time. And so she tore off a corner of the loaf. Some people call it the heel. I like to call it the knobby. And she tore off the knobby, which is my favourite part of the loaf. And she took a bite of that first girl's piece of bread. And it was white, and it was too doughy, really. This is very nice. And she set it down. Then she tore the second girl's bread. And that was barley bread. And she ate that, but it wasn't quite right. It was fine. It wasn't bad. And then she tried the mouse bride's loaf of bread, this wheat bread, and it was the most beautiful bread she'd ever tasted. And she got some butter out, and she buttered the bread, and the butter melted into the bread, because the bread was, even though it was 3 days later, carrying it in the sun, it was still warm, and it just melted into the bread, and she ate that. And you can't get much better than freshly baked bread and butter, can you? No, it's one of the best things ever. And everybody else tried the breads, and all the people in the family, they all agreed that Hans's betrothed bread was the best of the lot. And then the mother said, tomorrow, I want you to go to your future brides, your betrothed, and I want you to ask them to make some cloth. Each of them, ask them to make some cloth. And so the next day they all set off, Hans included. And this time when Hans went into the forest, he gathered more and more flowers until he had a little tiny bouquet of about 8 flowers. And he knocked on the door of the cottage when he got there, and he went in and he handed her the flowers, and she took them and she said, oh, thank you so much. Are we getting married today, or do you have another task? I have another task. And you look sadder than you did last time I saw you. What's wrong? Well, my mother's asked all of our potential brides, our betrothed, to weave some material. And I don't know how a mouse can weave material. Don't you worry, she said. I got this. And she sat up on her little mousy haunches and tail wrapped round over her toes, and she called out in mousy language, and all these mice came into the room. 100 mice came into this room. Oh, Hans still wasn't used to seeing 100 mice milling around on the floor. I mean, 1 or 2 is one thing. They're kind of cute. Dirty but cute, but 100 of them? In a small confined space? No! He wasn't very comfortable at all. But she stood up on her hind legs and she said for the mice to go and find the finest flax and bring it back. And off the mice went. And Hans and the Mouse Bride, they sat down and they talked. And they talked about all sorts of things. They talked about the woodlands of the forest, of the fruits that you can find there, of the light that refracts off the trees and the leaves, the way morning light differs from evening light, the way that midday light shines down and is so bright. They talked about the smell of the earth in the spring when the frost is gone and the ground starts to thaw out. And you know the smell I'm talking about. Oh, it's one of the best smells ever. Anyway, the mice came back with the finest flax that they could find. And they started to turn the flax and they started to spin it and it became thread. Thread and more thread, the finest thread that he'd ever seen. And then the Mouse Bride took all of that thread into another room and she told Hans to wait outside. And he could hear the loom moving. And he was wondering how on earth mice could work a full-sized loom. Because he'd seen it when they'd gone into the room. He looked where they were going and he could see a huge wooden loom in there. And he thought, how can she do that? But you know what? He didn't see because she shut the door and the mice set to work. They strung the loom up with all the thread. And then she was the shuttlecock. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen thread being made or cloth being made. There are strands like a piano or like a harp, all these strings, right? And a shuttlecock would go between the threads and then they'd switch and she'd go back the other way. And that's how it was with this loom, except she didn't do that. She just dove in and out of the threads. And the mice had the block of wood and they'd push it down to make it tight. And then she'd run all the way back, over and under, over and under, over and under. And they'd tighten it and then she'd run back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until the thread was made into a cloth. And then she wrapped up the cloth and put it in a walnut. And she and the other mice came out of the room. All the mice vanished, apart from her, and she held it up. He bent down and picked her up in his hand. And he took the nut and he says, "What's this?" That is where the material is. When you give it to your mother, she will crack it open and the material will be in there. Material in this nut? Yes. Don't fear. Your mother will like it. All right. Thank you very much. And he kissed the side of the mouse's head. Thank you so much. I look forward to our next visit. And he sat her down on the table. And he made his way home. But his heart, as he got close to home, became a little bit heavier. And when he got home, his brothers were there already, and the cloth was on the table from the other two young ladies, and his mother was waiting for Hans. And the brothers looked at him. There was no cloth upon his person other than the clothes that he was wearing. "Well, where's your cloth?" they said. I have it. "Where is it?" "It's in my pocket. It's in my pocket." "So your bride didn't make much, did she?" He said, "No, I've got cloth in my pocket. Mother, just have a look at these first." And so Hans's mother looked at the first piece of cloth, and it was very rough. It wasn't very soft at all. But it was fine for what it was. And she set it down and then went to the middle brother's betrothed piece of material. And that was much finer, but it wasn't tightly woven, so there were gaps in it. You know, when you stretch material, you get those little holes. Well, you didn't really have to stretch it much for those holes to appear, and they were quite big. It was badly woven, very, very badly woven. He said, "Well, Hans, where is your material?" Hans reached into his pocket and handed her the nut. I'm like, "What kind of wife puts material in a nut?" "The good kind," said Hans. "The caring kind," said Hans. And his mother broke the nut open. And Hans, he didn't want to watch. He was looking at his father. And as his mother took the cloth out of the nut, which he saw from the corner of his eye, his father's mouth fell open. And he looked. She kept pulling all of this cloth out of the nut until there was 5 yards of cloth, a yard across, 5 yards in length, all from that tiny little nut, because the cloth was so fine. And it was also the softest that they'd ever felt. They couldn't believe it. Who is this mysterious woman who bakes the best bread, who makes cloth so fine as this? This grey-haired, cute-nosed, blue-eyed wonder of yours, said the brothers. Well, the father said, well, boys, it's Midsummer's Eve in a few days. We know that it takes Hans a while to get to his bride, his future bride, so we shall marry. It is our tradition in our family that we marry on Midsummer's Eve. So go and get your brides and we shall have a group marriage. All three of you will be wed on Midsummer's Eve. And so they all set off. And Hans was like, great, it's all over. I'm going to get married. And then he thought, great, I'm going to get married to a mouse. How's that going to work? What are my parents going to say? What are my brothers? Oh, they're going to they're going to be terrible. They're going to say all sorts of things to me. But he gathered a bigger, beautiful bouquet. A bouquet fit for a bride this time. There were 15 or 20 small meadow flowers that he'd found. Tied them all together with a long piece of grass. Then he knocked on the door and handed it to the wee mouse. And the wee mouse looked at him and said, are we to get married now? And he looked down and said, yes, we are. I think we'll make great companions. And I do too, said Hans. But what's bothering you? Well, my mother and father and my brothers, when they see that you're a mouse, well, I don't know what they're going to say. Don't worry about it. All right, he said. And he picked her up. And they stepped outside. And she said, wait. And she stood up on her back legs and she called out in a mousy talk. And 4 rats, big, grey, sleek rats appeared. And they were harnessed together, these 4 rats, 2 and 2. And behind them there was this little burr nut carriage on wheels. And she said, if I'm going to be married, I want to travel in style. So could you put me in the carriage, please? I'm afraid there's not enough room for you. I'm sure there's not room for me. I'm this big old guy, and that's a little tiny burr nut, but you can certainly ride in it, and I'll run along beside, okay? And so he lowered her down, and she stepped into the little tiny carriage made of a nut. And she snapped her fingers, and off the rats ran. And Hans kind of half ran and half walked quickly alongside them, and they talked. Now, a day's journey from the house, there was a river that Hans would cross before getting, deep into the forest. And a lot of people travelled through the forest, going from town to village and village to town, and they started to cross it. That tiny little carriage with those 4 rats pulling it, and Hans walking alongside, looking down at them, smiling at his mouse bride. Now, this river was wide, and it was deep, and it was fast. It rushed through there. And the bridge was a wide bridge, but there were no railings, there were no sidewalls or anything like that. It was just flat. Now, one of the reasons for this is because when the sheep farmers were making their way to market, the donkey carrying the sheep bundles were 2 donkeys wide, but with a big old thing on the fleece would hang over the side, right? There was nothing underneath the fleece except running water. That's why they didn't have walls on some of those bridges and some of those places in those days. And so they're walking across the bridge. There were no sheep on the bridge at this time, or donkeys carrying sheep, or farmers for that matter. But from the other side came a young man, and he was like one of those, the kind. And he looked at Hans, and he looked at the little tiny carriage, and he started to laugh. Oh, look! You're too big for toys like that, aren't you? And he pushed Hans back, and then he kicked the rats and the carriage into that river. And they fell in, and Hans ran to the edge of the bridge and looked down. I was like, what have you done? He turned around to look at the young fella, but the young fellow had gone. Hans was ready to to fight. Fight is never the answer. Never the answer. But he was so angry, that's what he wanted to do. And he called out, he ran to the other side of the bridge to see if they would come out on the other side, but nothing happened. And the water current was so fast, he couldn't swim, he didn't know what to do. But as he was thinking about what he could do, he heard something at the other end of the bridge. These horses, these great grey horses, were coming out of the river and were mounting the bridge, coming towards him. And behind these 4 great grey horses was this beautiful golden carriage. And there was this stunningly beautiful woman with a dark complexion and long grey hair. And she waved at Hans, and Hans waved back, like, what? And he kept looking over the bridge, and this woman, she called out, Hans, are you going to get into the carriage with me, or are you going to walk the rest of the way like you have been so far? What? He looked at the woman again. You don't recognize me, do you? And he looked at her, and he walked closer to her. And when he saw her eyes and a cute little nose, oh, I daren't say it, but were you the mouse that was just... Yes, she said. Oh, I'm sorry, but you have to explain. My name is Hans. I know your name, Hans. You've told me before, but I've never told you mine. It's Ilona. And I was once a princess. Well, I still am a princess. There was this witch who was jealous, and she had turned Ilona and her family and all the servants into mice. Now, sadly, Ilona's parents had died many years ago, but she now lived in that cottage with her servants, the people that looked after her, that she looked after. And it was going to take a commoner like Hans to fall in love with her and marry her, and for someone to try and kill her by throwing her in water, or with water. And so those 2 things, Hans was going to marry her, the bully, he had pushed her into the river, those 2 things had happened, and now she was transformed back into a princess. And they rode to Hans's parents' farm. And they were all a little gobsmacked, to be honest. You know what gobsmacked is? It's kind of like, wow! Who is that? And then we've got royalty visiting. And then Hans got out of the carriage, and they're like, what, Hans? What's going on? And he said, I'd like to introduce you to my bride. And there she was, a beautiful complexion and a long grey hair. And they had to say that she was the most beautiful woman that they'd ever seen, that they'd ever met. And they were married on Midsummer's Eve, and it was a great party, and it lasted for 7 days and 7 nights. You know how these things go. And then they rode the carriage back into the forest. Now, as they were riding back into the forest to get back to that little tupper, that cottage of hers, she told him that there was, in fact, a castle on the other side of the mountain. And would they like to live there? And Hans said, well, it's really up to you, but I'd be very happy staying in the cottage where we first met. And so that is where they made their home. And all of the servants were set free. And they all lived a very long time ago. The end. So I hope you enjoyed that story. I'm going to look at some of the comments. Oh, I'm so glad. So Liam apparently likes my story. So Liam, I thank you so much, Liam. Yay! Hopefully we'll get some more pictures from you either this week or next week, and I'll print them out because I'll have lots of ink ready for my printer, and I'm not going to run out again. And what? Why ew? Why ew, Joey? I don't understand that comment. Ew. Yes, quite the curse, isn't it? Because both of those... Oh, my... Yes, right, Via? I mean, how could that happen? Dale, nice to see you, man. So it's... Yeah, I fell in love with that. When I first read that story, I have to say that I absolutely fell in love with that story. And Yes. So I hope you enjoyed it. And what time is it? Oh, we've been going for 50 minutes. So what I do want to say before I go, I hope you enjoyed that news story. I really do hope you enjoyed it. And I want you all to find these wonderful books and read them to your kids. Like I said, I bought that book when I was in my late teens. Find some of these writers. I'm going to share some more books because I'm a big Trina Sharp Hyman fan. She unfortunately passed away a number of years ago. She lost her life to cancer. But she is one of my favorite artists still to this day. And I have a number of her books. And her artwork is absolutely delirious, just as the artwork in Aaron Becker's book, Journey, which is kind of like a continuation or an update, more of a continuation of Harold's Purple Crayon. And if you don't read the story, then you'll never know what I'm talking about. And then Finn Throws a Fit. David Elliott, he's another one of my favorites. And also Timothy Basil Eyring is another one of my favorite writers. I'm trying to think of, it was Basil something or other. Let's have a look. Oh, he also illustrated The Tale of Despero. I didn't know that. Oh, here it is. The Story of Frog Belly Ratbone. That was my first exposure to Timothy, and I loved that book. And so when I saw that David Elliott and Timothy had a book together, I thought, I have to get that. Even if my kids don't like it, I'm buying it for me. And then, of course, we've got Diane Sheldon's book, The Whale's Song. And none of these are like brand new books. They're all like old books. And then The Dancing Granny, which is just beautifully... This is more for grown-ups, this book, than for kids. The Dancing Granny by Ashley Bryan. Ashley Bryan is... I've never met him, but I have a friend who knows him well. They have camps next to each other, or they live near each other in the same town, and she knows him. And she says that he's an absolutely wonderful man. That would be Ruth. Hi, Ruth, if you ever get to see this. So I hope you've enjoyed the story today. I'm sorry it was only one, but it was a long one. And, well, we did do that Diane Sheldon book as well. And come back next week, and I promise I will have ink in my printer, because it's due today. And I shall print out all of the pictures. That'll be the first job that I do. So all of this week's images will be printed out before tomorrow morning. And so next Wednesday, you can come and listen to a folk and fairy tale and a made-up story. And I realized right at the very end, those of you who are storytellers might have seen that little flicker go across my face. That wasn't the story that Tim told. Nor was it Hans Christian Andersen's story. It was a finished tale. Like I've seen so much storytelling in this over this weekend. My brain is a little like, what went where and who did what and why did that happen? But I got the story out and the story was right. So anyway, thanks so much for being here. It's always fun. I like being here with you guys. And I hope your kids are enjoying it as much as I'm enjoying it. And please send your comments and your kids' artwork. And where does that apostrophe go? Does it go between the D and the S, or does it come after the S? Because I'm not very good at that kind of stuff. So somebody tell me, leave it in the comments how it should be done. Kids' artwork. Send me kids' artwork. Where does that apostrophe go? Anyway, thanks for being here. Enjoy the rest of the week. It's hump day. So enjoy the rest of the week. And grown-ups and older kids, maybe I'll see you on Friday for my Friday with Friends. Take care. Bye.